This episode of Monty's Minute is brought to you by Netflix. For a free 30-day trial, head on over to netflix.com/GamebreakerTV. What's up, everybody? Welcome back to Monty's Minute, episode number 19 for February 6th, 2012. I'm Gary Gannon. Boss, joining me, as always, the one, the only Mr. Monty Sharma. How are you, sir?
I'm great, Gary. How you doing?
Awesome. Ready to answer some viewer questions here and get right to it. You know, got to get the peeps jobs, got to give them the inside track. I love this show. It's like people really, really love this show. They really do. Like, because they don't get this information. They can't get this information anywhere.
It's just so easy, though. This is how we live our lives. So it's neat. I'm surprised people care. So thank I thank everybody who watches.
Let's start off this week. A question from Ryan K. Got a couple questions here. We'll start with the top. He says, I played both Rift and Star Wars: The Old Republic betas. And one thing that struck me was how quickly Trion was able to make changes, fix bugs, and implement new features, as opposed to BioWare taking a long time, sometimes weeks or months, to fix some major issues. Goes to referencing, talking about taking weeks to fix things like the guild interface window to properly display members and such. Do you have any thoughts, comments, or speculation on this matter? So I'm assuming... Why does it seem to some gamers that, some companies can kind of push out the fixes and others have kind of a longer cycle?
Yeah, a lot of it's sort of two parts, right? One part is how they manage their releases. So some companies, they like to have many releases over short periods of time. Now, a lot of times, and in fact, probably 5-6 years ago, that was more common, and players used to complain. Every time I sit down to play your game, I got to run a goddamn patch. And so then companies went to, okay, we're not going to release patches that often. We're going to make them bigger. We're going to make them better. We're going to test them more. And we're going to release them, over a period of a couple of months rather than a week or two. And so, what they do is if they have a hot fix, so here's something that's crashing the database or whatever, okay, we'll do that right away. If it's something that's annoying, that isn't quite right, that isn't as good as we want it to be, those are things that they say, all right, let's do this in a proper release, let's fix it, let's test it, let's roll it out. Now, I've seen some development methodologies that are, I'm going to say even more chaotic, and, assume a game that doesn't require a download. But, companies where they let the engineers push their own patches. So
wow,
there isn't
really?
a release. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Not going to name the company, but they are very experimental in what they do. And the engineer actually, he's got approval to do what he or she's doing. They do the work, and then they push the patch live. And it'll happen in the game, and they're very analytics driven, so they'll see if the patch was good or not. That really drives the engineer to QA their own code, because if it blows, the only person to blame is them. Yeah.
So what do you think? What do you think we're seeing more? Is there a trend in this cycle, or is it just really dependent on the company? Because like Ryan is saying here, Trion really got a lot of props from the community and gamers in general, just how fast they were kicking stuff out. I mean, is it at all attributed also to the tool set that they build kind of early on in the back end of how to actually put this stuff out, or is that not necessarily a factor?
Sometimes that's the case. There's a whole discipline of tools engineering. And so there are engineers who specifically deal with things like, how do we improve how art assets get into the game? How do we improve our build systems? All sorts of things like that. There's a lot of folks who work on that sort of thing. In my mind, and I'm going to ask around some more about this, but this is sort of a pendulum swing thing. Hey, let's make a lot of little changes quickly. Let's save it for big changes. So something like the guild interface, it seems like a small change when you get it. But what may very well have happened, and I have no inside information on this, is there was a debate of should we do this or should we do that?
Always
well, hey, you want to make that change? Well, all right. Well, somebody's got to design that, and you go through a design cycle and all of that. So there's really a question of what the specific changes were. So if Trion was hitting a bunch of, functional bugs, and as soon as they were being found, they were getting crushed, that's great. That's a lot simpler than, hey, let's fix this. I can say I was in the room sometimes when some of the Eve issues were being talked about, and not in the actual planning session, but when the team was discussing them around me. And it was fascinating because they'd come up and they'd say, hey, we should fix X. And then somebody else would say, well, all right, if we fix that, what about this, 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 and this? And they get into it, and you realize how complex and connected some of these things are.
Interconnected. It's like a big spider web of systems and things that touch each other. And you're thinking it's just, oh, you're just going to change this little thing on the UI and fix my guild interface. And it's like, no, it touches like so many other things in the game, and 8 other departments have to be looped in on this. And there's just so much more.
You need new art assets. You want a sound that goes with it. It's work.
Ryan follows up here with us. He says, as a side note, I wonder why BioWare decided to go with a product like the Hero Engine. He says the engine of a software product is the core of the program. And for an MMO on the scale of SWTOR, I think you would want something that is sleek, a sleek, well-oiled machine. And they had like $250 to $300 million to play with to build and customize a top tier one. I guess the question is, when you have that kind of money, why go with sort of, the Hero Engine I wouldn't necessarily say is an off-the-shelf product, but it's a pre-built system rather than starting from 0 lines of code.
Yeah, and so, when you talk about you want a sleek, customized thing, look at it this way. No matter how rich you are, you don't build your own car. You may take a car and customize it, but you don't build your own car. And when you think about things like engines, this is, there used to be more debate about it. It's settling down a little bit. There are still the purists on the engineering side who say, no, I'm going to build my own engine. I'm going to build my own physics engine. Eve was famous for building their own graphics engine twice. So, and I am biased towards third-party tools, so let's just put that out there. Hero Engine's actually a very good chunk of code. When somebody like SWTOR buys it, they buy source code rights to it. And what they get is a core engine that's been tested and run for years. And bugs have been pulled out of it. It's been tested in different environments. They know all sorts of things about it. Now, if you start writing it from scratch, you can add a good year, year and a half to your dev cycle, which is expensive. And the other thing is all of those bugs and problems that you have doesn't work. You're not going to be able to do them. I mean, it's the same thing with World of Tanks, built on the Big World engine. And, they were able to do it quickly. It was solid. Big World had solved all sorts of scaling issues that, you normally find in an engine only by hitting them. And so they had all these things fixed, and it went so well that, Wargaming, the guys who make World of Tanks, turned around and bought Big World and said, we want even more access to what you're doing. And they bumped up that team size, but, Big World is still available. So it's a better product.
So let me ask you this, because a lot of times in talking about the Hero Engine specifically is when games that use it hit some technical hiccups along the way somewhere where people find some issue, frame rates, this, that. And I don't know where this data comes from, to be honest. Like all of a sudden you see some forum thread and people are like, it's the Hero Engine that's the problem. Like, and it spirals out of control and everybody says, no, it really is. That's what it is. Is there truth in that though? Or is it completely just a spun out of control kind of internet rumor 9 times out of 10? Or why does that happen?
It's funny, we worked with a number of, or a few first-person shooters, and as soon as anything changed in the first-person shooter, everybody screamed, you added lag. Why did you do this? You made it laggy. And, it was funny, when we first started hearing those complaints, we do all sorts of work to figure out what it is. And there's people out there who will check the file system and say, oh, wait, these files were added. Where are they from? Oh, they're from Hero Engine, they're from VBox, they're from so-and-so. They're the problem. And when you talk to the game developers themselves, they kind of shrug it off. They go, look, it doesn't matter what we do. I could change one letter on the title screen and I'd have people screaming about lag. And then, I went through this exercise to figure out how do you measure lag, how do you know what's added to lag and all that sort of stuff. And it's incredibly hard to measure. It's not something that the average, player is going to do even remotely accurately. So most of the time when you hear, oh, such and such is the cause of this problem, they're usually wrong. Now, let's say they're right, because there's some very smart players out there. I don't want to suggest they're all, I won't even come up with a euphemism. It's not going to help me. But there's some very smart players out there, and they say, yep, this issue here is this sort of a graphics issue that's coming from this part of the engine. Okay, that's fine. Now, what you have is the people who make the engine, it is in their utmost interest to do everything they possibly can to fix the smallest issues that are in that engine. We used to get things where it's, some engineer at a customer company would mention, yeah, kind of does this, and that's annoying when we have to code around that. I'd go home and I'd start screaming at, the engineering team, we got to get this done. This is priority. Change our roadmap and push it out because we want that customer to be happy. So, compared to if it's an internal team, what happens is everyone these days uses agile development methodology where you get together at the beginning of what's called a sprint and you decide what's going to happen in that sprint. The development methodology these days is time-driven rather than feature-driven. So it used to be, you'd say, we're going to add all of these things, and then we're going to ship. Under Agile, you say, we're going to ship in 2 weeks, or we're going to ship in 2 months. And whatever gets done in that period is what gets done in that period. So when you have these meetings, these sprint planning meetings, things like, hey, that API is a little annoying, and I got to code around that, rarely make it to the top of the list. They don't even make it to the middle of the list. But for the engine producer, they make it to the top of their list because it's customer impacting. And so I actually think you get a better environment, you get a better setup, and you can do more. I mean, we talked, a few weeks ago when I was in Vancouver about the stuff they were working on with Overdriver. So these guys have built a multiplayer engine for, primarily mobile games. And the stuff that you can do with that engine is probably about, a month's worth of server-side engineering. You get that done in an hour or two. In a mobile game, that's really significant. You don't have the people with that particular skill set. You don't have the time to do it. So, I think in the future, we're actually going to see more use of engines, more use of third-party tools. And it's actually going to make things better, even though they will get blamed for everything that goes wrong.
All right, next up. It says, hi, Monty. Hi, Gary. Really loving the show. I've been watching every week. Thanks for watching. I have a couple of questions. First up, number one, I've been a Java developer for over 10 years. Is there a place in the industry for Java developers? Is it limited to tools and server processing? So,
I'll say there's two sides to that. One is an experienced coder is a wonderful thing. So the fact that you've got 10 years of experience says a whole lot of things. One is your ability to learn things, stay on top of things, pick up new languages, whatever. If it's Java, it is going to be primarily server-side stuff that's going on. Yes, there's a whole, there's the tools group who are doing automation to improve the effort to build games. There's server-side code, which is going to be things like, your registration system, your hooking into billing systems, forums, backends to a lot of the website stuff, as well as server logic, as a lot of companies move the logic out of the client into the server. So they have a slimmer client and they've got less hacking issues. So there's all of that. And if your dream desire is to do client-side stuff, you can enter a company doing server-side code, spend some time doing client-side things, and invariably you're going to be in a situation where one of the things that people really want to get done is client-side, but in that sprint planning meeting, there isn't an engineer to assign to it. You put your hand up and say, hey, I could do this fancy thing on the forums you want me to, or I think I know how to do that. People will love you a lot.
Follow up from Kirk here. It says, this one's going to be interesting. I think this one's going to be all over the board. But it says, he says, what is the work environment like within gaming companies? I've worked for different sized companies and in different fragments of the IT industry, from startups, and made the move from a startup to a large established company when my son was born. So he says, stability in the company was a big factor in that move. But the development process and that I work on he works on large enterprise applications means that there is not so much like crunch time with the releases. So he sounds like it's a little bit more relaxed. Is there a similar state in the gaming industry, or is it all crunch time, must work extremely long hours? Is a young family and the gaming industry compatible?
So, let's break that down a few different ways. It is all over the place. When you've got AAA titles, particularly the console-based ones, they're trying to hit a launch window, and it's a big deal if they slip. And so for titles like that, you will get crunch. Now, the industry's come to learn that crunch is not good over the long term. And, Tony Williams, who used to be the general manager at Relic, he was at EA, he did Company Heroes, Need for Speed, awesome guy. And Tony always says that, you know what, you can crunch for about 2 weeks. That means you're working late into the evenings and you're skipping your weekend in between. But at the end of that, it takes you almost a month of working at a regular pace to return to full productivity. So long crunch cycles are getting broken down. They're trying to do more things. I hear more and more on the AAA side that work is getting shifted to other studios. So they're coming up, and instead of just crunching the team they have, they'll grab part of a team that's working on a future release and say, hey, give us 10 guys who can do this, give us 15 guys who can do that, and they'll add to the team to kind of pull it out. Now, when you get into smaller developers, indies, and some of these indies could have 100, 200 people in them, but they're not driven by the same console cycles where you've ramped up a huge marketing campaign for it to launch in the fall. It's a big deal. For these indies, they have more of a choice. And generally, if you're in a company that's crunching a lot, the word is, the sense is it's poorly managed. So you're not planning well. You don't have enough cash. You haven't organized the work properly. Your design was flawed. Things are happening to put you in that position. So, much for the mentality I'm seeing in game developers these days is plan out the core of the product, get the core done, and hey, we don't have 10 whiz-bang features we thought of. That's fine. Let's get it out the door, start making a little bit of money, because with online games, we have years to fix, various issues, and it gets better and better and better. And so, with that sort of shift in mentality, it's getting better. Now, in any job, you work long hours. I mean, any startup, you work long hours. That's true. And
I was going to say, I've been on my 2 weeks now for, 2 years.
Yes,
but it's actually, what's really interesting what you said is I actually thought you would have went the other way with it. When you brought up indies, I thought you were actually going to say that they're going to crunch a lot more because the time is money. They're on a little bit more of a shoestring, and they're really trying to push all their people because it's a startup, it's an indie to get a lot of stuff done. It's funny that you say it's the opposite effect.
Yeah, and so let me expand on that and say it depends on the size of the indie. So I know some indies that are 2 guys who have day jobs, right? They're going to work really hard, but for them it's a passion project, not how they eat. When you get into an indie that's let's say 10 people or above, that means they've had at least a successful game, or they have financing from somewhere. And at that point in time, when you get to a team size that's that big, you have experienced people who should know what they're doing. You've got folks who can estimate properly, and you work a plan much better. So, yeah, there's people, and, look, I worked that hard. I'm going to be on Skype probably till 9 o'clock tonight, and it's been like that every night for, I can't remember how long. But as my wife said one time, it's not that I have too much work to do. It's I have a personality defect. I do all sorts of things, and that's what puts me in this position. So quit your whining. And
that's what I'm going to tell my wife tonight. She's like, stop working. And be like, I have a personality defect. You don't understand. Exactly. Monty and I, we suffer from the same syndrome. It's proven. She's like, go to the doctor.
Yeah, but it's it's that sort of thing. And for me, I'm not crunching because I have to do one project to the nth degree. I've got 20 different projects, and they're all things I'm fairly passionate about, and I'm spending time because I really want to see this happen. Nobody's making.
Yep. All right, next up from Sam. He says, hello, guys. Great show. In the movie industry, it seems like going behind the scenes or the making of is a pretty common occurrence. But in the gaming world, we never get to see a guided tour of the developer's data center. I am curious if you can speculate on what sort of infrastructure Blizzard or Sony has in place to support their games and online community. Like, he's looking for, like, he wants specifics here. Like, he's saying drive space, bandwidth, CPUs, etc., etc. Yeah. Thanks for my question.
And I'm going to skip some of the specifics because they're held by folks who actually surprisingly don't want to talk about them. But
yeah, I was going to say, I think a lot of that stuff is kind of under the radar. Didn't really, side note though, but wasn't there like some really like cool video that CCP did on their whole Tranquility? Yeah. That was a great video. They actually did show it off.
Yeah, and we'll talk a little bit about their architecture versus a lot of other companies. But let me say, if I never do another tour of a data center, I'll die a happy man.
I mean, they're not really that exciting. They're not very exciting.
They're massively unexciting. Yes. Okay, so what you have is racks and racks of servers. Green lights blinking is good. Red lights blinking is bad. And then you've got guys who have to make sure these servers are up. Now, a little more complex in terms of, you have special servers that run your database. They have lots more RAM. Storage actually isn't that big of an issue for most of these guys compared to enterprise operations. Is that they're dealing in tens or hundreds of gigs. They don't have a ton of that moving around. Bandwidth, bandwidth setups in the data center that any of the game companies would use. You'd have two primary fiber loops, different networks, multiple providers. And you buy your bandwidth in the kind of way of, look, here's the base bandwidth we want, but we want to be able to spike up to this at a reasonable fee. And, that's how we manage things. Now, a lot of these guys will actually use CDN, a content delivery network, like Akamai and Lime something or another, who keeps sending me email, and I forget their name, what they'll do is they'll take something like your patch, and they'll move it to different parts of the internet, and they'll serve it off their servers to reduce that spike you have on your side, because spikes actually get fairly expensive. So, on the bandwidth side, it really depends on the number of users and rolling it up. What I was always surprised at is how little bandwidth MMOs actually needed. I'm going to say, at least back in the days when anybody cared to ask the question, so this is probably about 4 years ago was the last time I heard this question, the games were running on something like they needed a steady 54K of connection.
Really?
And, out of my house, I'm running 20 meg. So, but add that up across, 1 million users, and you can figure out what pipes they need. Now, don't do it across 1 million users. At peak, only 20% of your population base is online and hitting your servers. You also do things like polling intervals, so they only send every so much time, and so you're not actually hitting that peak, but that's the theoretical maximum that you would have. Server style falls into sort of two categories. CCP went the way of blade servers, and they were a really hot thing, a few years ago. And thank God I'm not buying servers anymore. But the sense I have, at least from what I'm seeing, is that's fallen off a little bit. And what a blade server was is you essentially have a motherboard that docks into this chassis, so you can have a higher density of these, motherboards, which means a server in a small amount of space. Now, the problem is space isn't the biggest cost that you have in the data center. It's actually air conditioning. So keeping these things cool is very expensive. The air conditioning takes a ton of power. The other thing about every data center I've ever been in, it's flipping cold. It's really cold. Our guys, when they used to go to the data center, winter jacket on. Summer, doesn't matter. They've got a winter jacket on. It's that cold. I tell you funny stories. One time in Boston, we had a blizzard. It dumped, over a foot. I think it was 16, 18 inches that time. And what happened was the data center our servers were in, they lost power, and then the backup generator was in trouble. It was going offline. It was starting to go offline. The AC stopped working. Now, this is in the middle of a blizzard. The AC stops working. The probes on our servers hit 120 something before they shut themselves down for safety reasons. And so here I am calling up customers. It was a Sunday. And, I'm calling them, I'm sending emails, I'm saying, terribly sorry, there's been a blizzard and our air conditioning stopped working.
There's a blizzard and our air conditioning doesn't work.
It was hilarious. But so, good.
I found a very, very, very exciting photo of CCP's data center.
Yeah, there you go.
There you go. This is why you do not see behind the scenes videos of data centers, because it's just a room like that with lots of air conditioning vents on the floor. And I assume are those, have you been in this one? Does that look familiar?
No.
Okay. I think that is CCP's dev center. I assume those might be some sort of like sliding glass doors. And I'm going to assume that behind that are just a ton of blades. So that's very exciting stuff.
You've got and part of the reason CCP has a database problem because they have the single universe. So they do all sorts of things to optimize their database interactions. And so they were the first ones to move to solid state drives, and just about everybody these days is using solid state drives. They are such wonderful things. I can't believe I stuck with spinning media so long. But solid state drives make it much faster to handle really large databases. They will go with heavily overpowered database servers. So the database servers usually will be the current generation of server chips from Intel. Then all of the other servers tend to run one generation behind because the price drop is substantial, and you just don't need that power. Now, the other side of blades is, generic Linux boxes, which a ton of developers use. And for those, they're looking for a fairly decent box, a reliable box, but you can stack up a lot of them. And it's just as cheaper or cheaper than blades, because it might take up a little more space, but you're still limited by your power purchase. And so, people don't sweat that. Boxes are very cheap. They stack them together, and that works fine. But now what you see more and more people getting into is actual cloud storage. So Amazon EC2, if you're doing a mobile game, you're doing a social game, you throw it up on EC2. You use Overdrive, or you use RightScale, you use Internap. And Internap's got Agile Cloud, which we used at MassDigi. They're a sponsor. Thank them very much. But all of this stuff it's up in the cloud. You don't have to worry about it. You can buy small parts of servers. You get virtual servers. And so you can start off. We did a project this summer, which we actually won an award for just a couple of weeks ago when I was in Florida, Gary. At MassDigi, we did a project with a bunch of students. And it was an idea I had around a medical game that used asynchronous social model for gameplay. And when we were building sort of a online game, I had the moment of panic of when the student who was doing the back end design said, all right, so where are we going to put this thing? It's like, oh no, I don't have an ops team. If I go to the college and ask them to put up a server that's publicly accessible, that's going to take 6 months. But luckily, we had a relationship with Internet at that point. They gave us some of their virtual server space. We popped it up in 5 minutes. My bill was in the order of $11 a month while we were in development, right? You can't do anything cheaper than that. And it was rock solid. And if there was maintenance or anything else, they told you way ahead of time what was going to happen, all that stuff. It was awesome.
So would you see, do you see full on, do you see big, mega MMOs like, companies like Blizzard and stuff actually moving to cloud on all of this kind of stuff? Because I mean, I feel like cloud right now is really good to a point, because we even started just Gamebreaker on a cloud, and we even hit a wall at some point where we were just like, yeah, we have to kind of go to the next thing.
Yeah, so there's a couple of things that are going to happen. One is the cloud is going to reach a point of economies of scale where it's consistently cheaper than it is running your own servers. So, back 5 years ago, we were using a hosted site out of San Francisco, and we needed it for some scalability issues, and they were charging 3 times what it was costing us to run it ourselves. Now, they had a bulletproof infrastructure. It was really nicely put together. They had top-tier hardware. And we had, the cheapest functioning servers we could buy racked up in a decent data center. So over time now, when I look at some of the EC2 builds and the Agile Cloud stuff from Internet, that stuff is actually getting, at the low end, much more cost-effective. So until I can afford an ops guy, until I can afford, a couple of racks worth of servers, it's not worth it unless I'm doing specialized things. So in the past, a lot of the cloud stuff was not optimized for network latency, but it was optimized for internal latency. So if I'm going between 2 or 3 servers, it's really fast. If I'm going to hit the internet, it's adding 20 to 30 milliseconds of unnecessary latency as it's moving through its own network. Now they're fixing those things because they're saying, oh, okay, is that the problem? Great, we'll change hardware configurations, we'll bring in some bigger iron, and that stuff's going to go away. I think ultimately we get to the point where stuff does live in the cloud, and even the big guys will get there. I don't think that's going to happen to the big guys in the next 10 years. It may be a little longer than that, but I think it is inevitable. There's a lot of huge services that started out as small services in the cloud and have scaled up there and are doing just fine.
And it seems like one of those areas of the gaming industry that if they can reliably get rid of that aspect of their business, they probably would, because there's really nothing.
Right.
I can't see there being that much anything. There's no real. Right now, there's a huge benefit to having your own data center for stuff like this, but I'm sure they'd all love to offshoot that if they had the reliability and could kind of count on that happening. You wouldn't want to keep that around. Who wants all that?
Yeah, and most of them don't actually have their own data center. They're co-locating in somebody else's data center. Mm-hmm. So a data center needs to have a diesel generator that's tested on a monthly basis. It needs to have, 2 fiber rings running through it. You don't want to build a building like that. So you go into Internet, you go into CoreSite, Terramark, any of those sorts of places, and that's where you put your stuff, even if you're Blizzard.
Even if you're Blizzard. Monty, the wealth of information that you just can't get anywhere else on the inside track of gaming. Follow him on Twitter at Monster, MONTSTER27. And if you have a question for Monty, send it to Monty at Gamebreaker TV. Send us your questions. We never asked for, I don't know if we ever asked for, but we should. Video questions. If you guys have video questions, sure. Record yourself, post it up on YouTube, send us the link. Send us the link and send it to Monty at Gamebreaker.tv, and we'll play it on the show. I don't know if we've ever asked for this, but we love video questions. We take them all the time on the other shows. Monty,
Cool.
always a pleasure. Always a wealth of information. Have a great week. Stay warm with that blizzard coming your way.
Thanks, Gary.
We do the show. I guess we don't really do the show live yet, but I'm going to force Monty to do the show live every week. He doesn't know that yet, but we're going to do it. I don't know. Watch the schedule. Hopefully we'll put it up there. Anyway, Monty, have a great week. Everybody watching, thanks for watching. We'll see you next week for more Monty's Minute.
See you, Gary.